Hi guys, so Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, clashed in Parliament today. So let's hear what they both had to say.
By working together across all four nations of our country.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the government announced the next stage of easing lockdown restrictions. If that plan's to work, and we want it to work, we need an effective track, trace and isolate system. The Prime Minister promised a world-beating system would be in place by the 1st of June. The latest figures from yesterday's press conference, hosted by the Prime Minister, showed that 33,000 people are estimated to have COVID-19 in England. The latest track, trace and isolate figures show that just over 10,000 people with COVID-19 were reached and asked to provide contact details. I do recognise the hard work that's gone into this, but if 2/3 of those with COVID-19 are not being reached and asked to provide contact details, there's a big problem, isn't there?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been stunned by the success of the test and trace.
So 2/3 not being reached is a success. That is a success. What is a failure, Boris? If 2/3 of something hasn't been complete and only 1/3 of it has been complete, and for you that is a success, then what the hell is a failure?
Operation, and contrary to his prognostications of gloom, it has got up and running.
See, Boris Johnson doesn't actually respond to the question. He attacks the messenger. He attacks the questioner. Instead of actually saying, well, we have failed because of X, Y, or Z, he's instead saying, how dare you ask this question? How dare you point out the fact that we have failed? Instead of actually responding to the reason why you have failed.
I think much faster than the doubters expected, and they are getting it.
But how you didn't say their doubt was unfounded. You didn't say, well, what Keir Starmer has said is wrong. We have actually succeeded. No. Instead of saying we have succeeded because we have tested everyone, you're avoiding that, and instead you're attacking the messenger. I don't know why anyone else can't see through this.
Dido Harding and her team have recruited 25,000 people, and so far they have identified and contacted 87,000 people who have voluntarily agreed to self...
Yes, over the period of the pandemic. But he's talking about the 30,000 people who are infected now. Some people have recovered, some people have not recovered. But he's talking about the currently there are 30,000 people infected. 10,000 people have been traced. Now, what happened to the other 20,000? It doesn't matter if you have 100,000, Boris, tracing these people. If you have 1 million people tracing, if they're still not succeeding in their job, there is a problem.
Isolate to stop the disease from spreading. Now, I don't think he would have predicted that a few weeks ago, and I think he should pay tribute now to Dido and her team for what they're doing.
But the question is not about the team, it's about why did it not succeed? You have to take responsibility for it, Boris Johnson. You can't offload the responsibility onto someone else.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just hasn't addressed the question I put to him. I wasn't asking about those that have gone into the system, the 10,000, or who's been contacted. I was asking about the 2/3 of those with COVID-19, of the 33,000 who weren't reached. This is a big gap, and the Prime Minister risks making the mistakes he made at the beginning of the pandemic, brushing aside challenge, dashing forward, not estimating properly the risks.
Does that work, Boris? Looking like a fool? Who does it work on?
2/3 of those with COVID-19 are not being contacted. That is a big problem. Because if we don't get track, trace and isolate properly running, we can't open the economy, we can't prevent infection disease, spreading. So let me ask a question in a different way. What's the government's strategy for closing the gap between the number of people with COVID-19 and those going into the system, not what happens to those that go into the system.
Speaker, I hesitate to accuse the right honourable gentleman of obscurantism. He's misleading on the key point. The number of people with COVID, of course, is an estimate in this country, Mr. Speaker. He's inadvertently misleading.
Prime Minister, one of us is going to have to give way. It'll have to be you. Prime Minister, obviously nobody misleads, and no honourable member ever would, whichever side they're from. Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson is acting as if he's the opposition and Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister.
Inadvertently, I think, giving a false impression of what Test and Trace is doing. The 33,000 cases in the country is, of course, an estimate. What NHS Test and Trace is doing is contacting the vast majority of those who test positive and their own contacts.
And what about the others? Why is it the vast majority? So 1/3 is the vast majority. What sort of mathematics is that? That's worse than my mathematics.
Getting them to self-isolate. And it is a formidable achievement, Mr.
So once again, Boris Johnson is looking around him. He's not looking at Keir Starmer. He's looking around trying to get support, moral support from Parliament.
And yesterday, the right honourable gentleman was kind enough actually to say that he supported our policy and supported our programme. I seem to remember him saying that loud and clear yesterday. Today,
Yes, support the idea of test and trace. He didn't say he supported the fact that you failed. It's like saying, I support my football team, but that means that when they fail, I have to be happy with that. No. I support them. I hope that they win. In this case, he supported you in your initiative, but you failed. But you have to take responsibility for that.
I understand the constraints of the profession in which he used to work. I know how it works. Yesterday...
Once again, Boris Johnson is focusing on the opposition leader. He's not focusing on the bloody question. The question is, why have you failed to reach 2/3 of the people who are infected? And you're not answering that question. You're talking about Keir Starmer, you're talking about how great the team is. You're not answering the bloody question.
Today he seems to be yo-yoing back into a position of opposition. Which is it? Is he supporting what we're doing or is he against it?
Mr. Speaker, the figures I gave that the Prime Minister says are inadvertently misleading are the slide at his press conference yesterday. And
Keir Starmer is fantastic. Like, I'm misleading. Well, I'm misleading with your information.
Slide at the government's press conference last week, the latest figures. They're the two figures. Mr. Speaker, I do support the next stage of the operation, but the Prime Minister is wrong to reject challenge. 65,000 people have lost their lives because of COVID-19. The Prime Minister should welcome challenge that could save lives rather than complaining about it.
Complaining like a damn child.
Another risk to this plan is if local councils don't have the powers and resources to implement local lockdowns.
So I just want to talk about this a little bit. So what Boris Johnson seems to be doing is offloading the responsibility onto local councils. So it's no longer going to be something centralised in London. It's actually going to be the responsibility of local councils to deal with flare-ups. But the problem is that many councils are close to bankruptcy because of COVID-19, because they haven't been able to raise finances, because businesses have been closed, because almost a decade of austerity has left councils almost bankrupt. And now they're being asked by the government to shoulder the burden and to deal with COVID.
There's a report today that 8 out of 10 councils face bankruptcy or cutting services. Many of those are in the North East and Midlands, whereas the Prime Minister knows the worst affected areas for COVID-19. And the real concern amongst council leaders is that they don't have the powers or guidance to implement lockdowns quickly if needed. The Conservative leader of Oxfordshire Council said, "I'd be interested for central government to confirm what is meant by local lockdown, including clear guidance as to those powers and what's expected of us." Can the Prime Minister tell us when local authorities will get the guidance that they need?
Mr. Speaker, everybody understands, and we've seen it already across the country when there are local outbreaks, for instance in Weston-super-Mare.
So what are you talking about everyone understands? No one understands. That's why you're being asked. If a member of the Conservative Party has brought up this issue, then you won't be able to blame it on partisan politics. If a member of the Conservative Party, your party, is saying we don't know what to do, this is extremely serious. You know, we could dismiss it if it was a Labour or Liberal Democrat or SNP leader of a city or a council. But this is a member of the Conservative Party who should be in the know, a member of your party, and they don't know what the hell they're supposed to do.
Or in GP surgeries in North London, there have been local lockdowns, local crackdowns. We have a very effective cluster busting operation.
Cluster busting operation. Once again, here we have Boris Johnson with his ridiculous slogans. Dominic Cummings probably came up with that. Use this one, throw it in during PMQs. Maybe it will make the Brexiteers sit up.
Which is designed to ensure that we keep those outbreaks under control. Local councils understand how to do it with the local resilience forums, backed up by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. That is how...
But if a member... once again, if a member of the Conservative Party who is in a council said they don't know what to do, how can you say, well, they have all the information they need? Obviously, this one doesn't.
How it works, and that is how it is going to work, and it is a very effective way of keeping this disease under control. I'm not going to pretend to him or to the House that this thing is beaten or that the virus has gone away, because clearly that is not the case. We have to remain extremely vigilant, and local councils will be supported in doing their vital work in implementing local lockdowns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I now turn to the app? This really matters because unless someone with COVID-19 can name and identify everybody they've been in contact with, the app is the only way of tracing unknown contacts. The Honourable Member for Hove made precisely that point yesterday. He gave the example of how on earth do you trace everyone in close contact at a seafront or in a park without an app. Up until last week, the government maintained that the app was critical, another of their slides. But at the weekend, the Health Secretary downplayed the app, saying it was only ever additional support. So which is it?
Once again, the government just, as I said before in numerous videos, it's about throwing something against a wall and hoping it will stick. It's a game of whack-a-mole. It's not an actual plan. It's not an actual procedure written down and said, okay, this is what we're going to do to deal with this crisis. It's try this, doesn't work. Okay, try something else, it doesn't work. Try this next one, doesn't work. But before actually trying it, they roll it out, you know, go on TV, go on Sky News and broadcast it to the public saying this is going to be our way to deal with the coronavirus. And then after a week or two, they realize it doesn't work. They downgrade its availability, its ability to actually deal with the crisis.
Critical or not?
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether the right honourable gentleman can name a single country in the world that has a functional contact tracing app.
What's that got to do with what you had promised? You had promised an app at the beginning of June that would deal with this. We're at the end of June now. We're almost in July. And this app isn't available. And there's talk that this app won't be available until October. What's the point in having an app that's going to help trace the infection if you have to wait months for it to arrive? It's a complete shambles. There was an opportunity to work with Apple to develop an app. you decided not to. You decided to do it on your own. Then it didn't work with Apple devices. It only worked with about 5% of Apple devices. Now you're going back to Apple and Android to see if you can get an app working. So valuable time has been lost.
Because there isn't one. What we have, and I think what has, I'm afraid, left the opposition slightly floundering, is a very successful test and trace, NHS test and trace operation, which yesterday they...
So once again, the whack-a-mole. Oh, here we have another idea. Forget about the app, even though we, trumpeted this app for ages. Forget about the app. Now we're going to talk about something else.
Yesterday, they said it was good enough for this country to go forward with...
Boris, the opposition is trying to help you. They're not help you, but help the country. If you present something and it sounds like a good idea, they're going to support it. They can't be held responsible if you're not actually able to implement it. I supported the idea of a lockdown. But if you didn't implement the lockdown right, you can't blame me for your failure. In the same way, you can't blame the opposition for supporting you in, rolling out an app when the app, and then discovering that the app failed. It's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility. It's insane.
Step 3 of our plan. Today, they're yo-yoing back again and saying that it's not good enough. I think they need to make up their mind. I think they need to get behind NHS.
Why is it necessary for them to get behind you? You have a majority in Parliament. You're talking as if you are in a coalition with them. They are the opposition. You are the government. Stop blaming them for your incompetence and your failure.
Test and trace and support it and take the country forward together.
Germany, app working 15th June, 12 million downloads. 12 million downloads. Mr.
Slap.
Speaker, I checked that overnight. 12 million is way beyond. The Health Secretary said we'd have the app by mid-May, presumably on advice. The Prime Minister said we'd have it by the 1st of June. Now the government ministers say it won't be ready until the winter. We've spent 12 million on this. Other countries are ahead of us. When are we going to have a working app?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's completely wrong because...
He asked the question, when is it available? He's completely wrong. Okay. Once again, ignore the question, attack the messenger. This is not the sign of strength. This is the sign of weakness. Boris Johnson is extremely weak at the moment. A strong Prime Minister would be able to knock down every question with a fact. Boris Johnson isn't able to answer even a single question here. It's all attack the opposition, attack them for your failures, deflect, insult, in a sense, and ignore. Once again, this is a sign of weakness in a Prime Minister. I don't see Brexiteers look at this and go, yeah, he's answering, he's doing great here. I'd like to see how they see that. I don't see it. I see weakness here.
No country in the world has a working contact tracing app, and we've always been clear that the app would be the icing on the cake. If we can get it to work, it would be a fine thing, but there isn't one anywhere in the world so far. What we do have is a fantastic test.
So the one in Germany is not working.
And trace NHS test and trace operation that is already up.
But you promised, Boris, the one on the 1st of June. Why didn't you come back? If that was a lie, why didn't you say, no, I did not promise it on the 1st of June. I promised it in October, or I promised it another time, or it's not available at the moment. You see the way that he's not answering the question. He's called out on things that he has said in the past, and instead of responding to those, he starts talking about something else.
Up and running, that is going to get better and better and will be indispensable to our future success. And I think he should support it. And I think, by the way...
So he has to support it. He has supported the government's initiatives. Why should he support your failures? He has supported you in trying to do the right thing. You have decided not to do the right thing. You have decided you have to take responsibility once again for this failure, Boris Johnson. It's not Keir Starmer's fault that you failed. You can't blame him once again for it.
That he should be making much clearer that he supports our programme going forward. And when you
sorry, apologies for interrupting all the time, but this is extremely frustrating to listen to. He has failed, and he's blaming the opposition for his failure. This is what's happening here. The Prime Minister has promised to do something, to do X. He has failed. When he made that promise at the beginning, before X arrived, he asked the opposition for their support. The opposition said, we're going to support you. Now that he's failed, he's blaming the opposition.
Since he mentions Labour councils and support for Labour councils, perhaps he might clear...
Boris Johnson, who are you talking to here? Why are you looking at your own backbenchers and your own front bench here? Why are you not looking at the leader of the opposition? Who are you talking to? Look at his body language. This is someone who's not in command of the situation. He's not in control. He's looking away from the problem. The problem is on the other side. He's like a child who knows they have broken the rules, a child who knows they have made a mistake. And instead of looking at their parent in the eyes, they're looking at the floor, they're looking out the window, they're looking at their friends, going, help me out here. They can't help you out, Boris. They have to sit down. You're the one responsible here. This is shambles.
Up the position of yesterday and so say once and for all the Labour Council should be encouraging children in their areas now to go back to school.
What's this got to do? You're talking now about schools. It's like, yes, you should be going back. The Labour Council should be encouraging them back to school. How has this got to do with the promises that you made back in May?
Isn't it? We heard some warm words for him yesterday. Can he now confirm that he wants all children who can go back to school to go back to school this month?
Keir Starmer.
Yes, the only U-turn here was the Education Secretary on the 9th of June, who ripped up the government's plan to have children back into school before the summer break. Mr. Speaker, there's a theme to these exchanges. Last week I asked the Prime Minister about two claims about child poverty. He said absolute child poverty and relative child poverty have both declined under this government. On Monday, the Office of the Children's Commissioner ruled that the Prime Minister's answer was mostly false. The Prime Minister also said there are 4,000 fewer families living in poverty now than there were in 2010. On Monday, the Office of the Children's Commissioner ruled that was simply false. He's been found out. He either dodges the question or he gives dodgy answers.
Well said. This is Boris Johnson to a T. He dodges the question or he gives a dodgy answer.
Mr. Speaker, no more witnesses. I rest my case. Will the Prime Minister do the decent thing and correct the record in relation to child poverty?
I'm sorry, Boris Johnson is incapable of doing the decent thing, so it's a pointless question to ask, or a pointless request, I should say.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to point out to my learned friend that actually there are 100,000 fewer children in absolute poverty, 500,000 children falling below thresholds of low income and material deprivation. This government, as he knows, is massively...
I thought he was talking about families, not individual children.
Increasing universal credit, 7 billion more to help the poor...
Oh my God, universal credit, here we go. This disaster that should have been done away with before it actually began.
Poorest and neediest families in our country were getting...
Once again, look at the way Boris Johnson is not looking at Keir Starmer. He's looking at his supporters. Look, guys, my friends, support me here. Aren't I telling the truth? Or aren't I telling, aren't I responding to him? I'm not looking at him, but I'm responding to him indirectly because I'm looking towards you for moral support.
On with it, we're taking the tough decisions, and he still can't make up his mind. Talking about...
So,
child poverty, the single biggest determinant of a child's...
So, once again, this is Boris Johnson to a T. Boris Johnson incapable of actually responding to the question and instead responding to the questioner, attacking the questioner and not attacking the question. This is weakness. This is a sign of weakness in my eyes. But I'd like to know your opinions on this. Let me know in the comments section. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun. If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.